Good morning and welcome to our session today. My name is Kath Woodfinden. I'm a licensing team manager and I'm joined by my colleague Julie Flower, the Principal Licensing Practitioner for Policy. In this session, I'm going to cover licensable activities, the application requirements for grant of a premises licence, the upkeep of a licence once granted and how to make changes. I won't cover all of the possible changes, but we'll touch on those most commonly required. Julie will cover temporary event notices, known as TENs, pavement licenses, other types of licenses, and introduce the licensing direct service. The information given is the view of Cornwall Council Licensing Service. If you're applying within another local authority, it may be advisable to check with them or seek your own legal advice. We anticipate we'll be speaking for around 40 to 45 minutes with time left at the end for questions. And as Luke said, any we don't get to respond to or unable to answer, we'll email out the answers to everyone. So the Licensing Act 2003, next slide please Luke, came into effect on the 24th of November 2005. It established a single system for licensing premises which are used for licensable activities, those being sale supplies by retail of alcohol. If you're a qualifying club to supply alcohol to a club member or to sell alcohol to a guest of a club member, to provide regulated entertainment such as theatre performances, plays, indoor sporting events, boxing or wrestling, live or recorded music, dance music or films. To sell late night refreshment, selling hot food or drink between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. for consumption on or off the premises, including takeaways and mobile caterers, unless you're a hotel, staff canteen or a campsite. There are exceptions, and here we've got the Live Music Act exemptions. Next slide, please, Luke. So between the hours of 8 a.m. and 11 p.m., there are exemptions for the following: unamplified live music in any location, amplified live music in unlicensed premises and workplaces for audiences of less than 500, recorded music in unlicensed premises for audiences of less than 500. Any premises licence that has conditions that relate to this prior to the relaxation being permitted are suspended as a result of the relaxation. These can be reimposed if there is cause to have a licence reviewed. There are no exceptions to the requirement of a licence for the activity of sale, supply by retail of alcohol. Next slide, please, Luke. There's more exceptions there. Exemptions. Performance of dance less than 500 persons, 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. Sexual entertainment dance performance remains regulated. Performance of plays less than 500 persons, 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. Indoor sporting events less than 1,000 persons, 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. Greco-Roman and freestyle wrestling, if anyone's thinking of that, less than 1,000 people indoors. And travelling circuses for all entertainment, sport, except films, boxing or wrestling, and that's the same timings, 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. with no audience limit. Next slide, please. And there's a list of further exemptions. It includes private events, unless they're undertaken with a view to making a profit, and films shown for educational purposes. So the list goes on there as well. Entertainment at garden fêtes is a common one for charity, but if it's charitable. And then the next slide is licensable activity requirements. So licensable activities may only be carried out under and in accordance with one of the following: premises licence, club premises certificate, or a temporary event notice. Next slide. So to apply for grant of a premises licence, you must be 18 or over. The application form on submission must be accompanied by the operating schedule, the plan of the premises, the consent form of DPS, which has been signed by the nominated individual, proof of right to work if relevant, that is, if you are applying as an individual or a partnership, which is not a liability partnership. And the next few slides are going to cover the application form itself. So with regards to the applicant may be an individual, a company, a partnership, several individuals, other organisations or other prescribed persons, such as individuals acting as a representative for a company or individual. example, a committee of a village hall. Individual applicants and applications from partnerships, which are not limited liability partnerships, must demonstrate that they have the right to work in the UK. Note, if the business is a partnership, both individuals need to provide their right of work to documents. Next slide, please. Under the premises details and description of the premises, a premises means any place and can include a defined area, a building, part of a building, a vessel, a vehicle, or temporary structure. Should the address not be of a standard format, then ensure that full details are given. For example, if a field, the grid reference is to be stated. Additionally, although it's not a mandatory requirement, if an obscure location, it's useful to provide a location map. That would be sort of an example of that would be if you had several fields within an estate and you were using one of those fields. If you provide a location map, that is sometimes really helpful for members. Time limited or no expiry. Premises licenses are granted for life of business unless surrendered. Lapsed, they're subject to an annual fee. If the annual fee remains unpaid, it will be suspended. We go into the next one, the operating schedule. Part 3 of the application form is the operating schedule. You should take into account the Council Statement of Licensing Policy, which is available on our website. If you're submitting an application in the Truro, Newquay, Penzance or Falmouth area, it's important to read through the section entitled Cumulative Impact Assessment, currently in place in those towns, and consider how your application may impact on the licensing objectives within those towns. You need to provide details of when you would like the licence to start or state ASAP. Unless you specify an end date on the licence will remain operational subject to the annual fee being paid. When completing the description of the premises section, be clear. Example would be cafe, restaurant. If you're a festival, state days running for, the month intended. Example, a 2-day festival to be held on Sunday and Monday of August bank holiday each year. Be mindful of stating specific dates. An example would be that if you said the 29th of August each year, and that year that happened to be the bank holiday, then the following year these dates may not be those aligned to the bank holiday. So you could end up with them on a Wednesday and a Thursday. So it could cost you an issue. So you need to be mindful of that one. Next slide, please, Nick. So licensable activities shown here, and there's some further ones on the next slide. So we've got the plays there, indoor sporting events, boxing, wrestling, live or recorded music or films, late night refreshment, and sell by retail of alcohol. A commonly asked question is, do I need a licence for silent discos? And we consider these to be recorded music. So a licence, if it's for more than 500 people, or if the activity is after 2,300 hours, then yes, you would need a licence. Next slide. There is a requirement to state the timings for each of the activities. Next slide, please, Luke. There we go, and there's a requirement to state the timings for each of the activities. Note, this needs to be in the 24-hour clock. Be mindful that midnight is 0000 hours, not 1200 hours, as that would represent midday. You also need to state if the activity is indoors, outdoors, or both. Note, indoors would include marquees and tents with a roof. Indicate details of any non-standard timings. Example, if you wish to open later on Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, or a bank holiday. And then I would say on that as well, if you're considering outdoors, be mindful of the times that you're opening till if you've got nearby neighbours. Next slide, please. If you wish people to be able to consume alcohol on the premises, please tick on the premises. If you wish people to be able to purchase alcohol to consume away from the premises, please tick off the premises. If you wish people to be able to do both, then please tick both. If you're a premises which concentrates on food, example a restaurant, and you're permitting the customer to take away the unfinished wine they've purchased with their meal, then you would require on and off sales. Think carefully about what you state, ensure you're requesting all that you need, but don't include if not applicable. Example, if you only open an outdoor area for 3 months of the year on certain weekends, then state this. It may reassure any persons who be minded to object. Another example would be if you only intend to have live music till midnight 1 day a week, then state that. Provided clarity may minimise any concerns of consultees or other persons. And then we move on to the details of the nominated designated premises supervisor. The application requires that an individual is stated as the designated premises supervisor. This is generally the individual whom the premises licence holder has appointed to undertake the day-to-day running of the premises. The individual must hold a personal licence. The details of the personal licence number and the issuing authority are required to complete the application. There is a separate document which accompanies the application form. This is known as the consent of the DPS. This should be signed by the proposed DPS and ideally submitted with the application, at the latest by the last day of the 28-day consultation period. Late submission of the form may result in the delay of acceptance of your application. So if you'd applied for that for sale by retail of alcohol and you don't have anyone in there but you've applied for it on your application form, you wouldn't be able to carry out that licensable activity until someone was nominated and named on that licence. It is a mandatory condition that any premises authorising sale of alcohol must have a DPS who must hold a personal licence, except for community premises, as they can disapply for DPS requirement in favour of a management committee. And the next slide, please, Luke. Adult entertainment. At box K on the application, you're required to state any adult entertainment or activities which may give concern in respect of children, e.g. lap dancing. If none, state none. Next slide. The hours of the premises are open to the public are required. If you're undertaking sale by retail of alcohol, give consideration to drinking up time. This is usually half an hour prior to the closing time. So if you were serving alcohol, you're closing at 11, then you need to have your supply of alcohol terminating at 10:30. Steps to promote the full licensing objectives. The licensing applicants are expected to have regard to the council's licensing policy when describing the steps they propose to take to promote the full licensing objectives, which are prevention of crime and disorder. Example of all off sales will be in sealed containers or installation of CCTV. Second one, public safety. Example, all staff will be trained in the fire evacuation plan. Thirdly, prevention of public nuisance. The external area will close at and state a time that would be stated that will not impact nearby residents. Protection of children from harm. Apply Challenge 25. We would expect to see the standard Challenge 25 condition on all applications for sale supply by retail of alcohol. And if you do a search on Challenge 25, it does come up with loads of useful downloadable posters and information. So that's really helpful. Steps to promote licensing objectives. Applicants submitting an application within a cumulative impact zone should demonstrate an understanding of how the policy impacts on their application and state the measures they will take to mitigate any impact their business may have, with stated proposals to demonstrate their understanding of the cumulative impact zone. The steps put forward will translate into conditions on the premises licence subject to no objections, i.e. representations. Once completed, ensure the form is signed and dated. If you're submitting an application within an area where noise is an issue, state windows and doors will be closed after 2200 hours. A member of staff will check at intervals and state the time, so you could say hourly or half hourly, to ensure no noise is audible from the exterior of the building. The wording you state will translate into conditions on the premises licence, subject to no objections, i.e. representations. Any breaches may result in a review of your licence, so you need to ensure that anything stated can be adhered to. Conditions can also be put forward by parties making representations or modifications by members of the subcommittee if you were to go to a hearing. All licenses are going to apply to all licenses, the mandatory conditions, and relate to those listed there. And the next slide has the plan. This is a common error that people get this wrong, and it does cause a lot of delays in numerous applications. So the plan must be clear and legible. It needs to show the boundary of the premises. We ask for this to be defined in brown, identify any internal and external walls, and if differs, the perimeter of the premises. Identify the location of entry and exit to and from the premises. If that differs, the location of any escape routes. Should the premises be used for more than one licensable activity, identify the area used for each activity. We request that you indicate red on the plan for retail supply of alcohol, blue for entertainment, and purple for late night refreshment. The following, on the next slide, we've got the following other requirements, which are fixed structures, which may impact escape routes. Example, fixed furniture, or you may have a fixed bar area. Location and height of any stage or raised area. Location of any steps, stairs, elevators or lift, any verandas, that sort of thing. Location of public conveniences within the premises, even that includes the staff as well, because if there was a fire, they need to be able to locate everyone. Location and type of any fire safety equipment, and location of the kitchen. There's a link there to the planning regs, so all that information is contained within the document found on that link there. A key should be used to identify the points stated for clarification. An incorrect or a plan that is illegible may cause delays. Details of the plan requirements can be I've already said that, and that is on that link, the plan regulations. Next slide, please, Luke. So the submission of the application stating operating schedule, plan, consent of the DPS should be served on the licensing authority with the appropriate fee, and if applicable, proof of right to work. The application fees are based on the non-domestic rateable value of the premises, of the property. They're set by government and are statutory fees in a tiered system. If served electronically, the licensing authority will serve to responsible authorities on your behalf, but if it's a postal application, the applicant remains responsible for serving that. And the application then will be, once it's all complete, will be received and accepted. Following acceptance, on the next slide, once the completed application is received and accepted, the applicant will receive an acknowledgement. The applicant must then display a public notice. This must be displayed for a period of 28 days from the date following acceptance. It must be printed on pale blue paper and gives the prescribed information as described under the Licensing Act 2003. A press notice must also be produced. The notice must be published in a local newspaper, or if there is none, a local newspaper circular or similar document circulating in the vicinity of the premises. And apologies, because I can see I've popped local newspaper twice there. The notice must be published, the publication in the newspaper must be published on at least one occasion during the period of 10 working days, starting on the day after the day on which the application was accepted by the relevant licensing authority. So it's really important to get that right, because if you do it too early, then you would have to have it republished if the dates were wrong, because you have on there the date ending of the 28th day of consultation, which is the time when people can submit their representations. Failure to comply with the correct information would require correction, and that would obviously cause a delay in your application. And on the next page, it's also delayed. All applications are on our website, that is for grants and variations. You can see them, the details listed there. So there's one on there, the premises name and address, the applicant, date its application accepted, application type, licensable activities, the license reference number, the deadline for representations, and the dealing officer. So if anyone has any queries, they could email licensing@cornwall.gov.uk, ask for that officer, and they would then be able to forward them a copy of any of the information that they required. Town councils do tend to have a look at that website quite often. We do receive quite a large number of inquiries. And the next slide, please. Determination of application. Once you submit your application, the 28-day consulting period will take place. This allows time for responsible authorities and/or other persons who feel that the application could undermine one or more of the licensing objectives to make a representation, i.e. in support of an objection to the licence application in line with the 4 licensing objectives. So just to clarify there, the 28-day consultation starts the day after you receive the acknowledgement. And the next slide, please. If representations are made against an application which cannot be resolved, the application will be heard by the Council's Licensing Act subcommittee. The hearing must be carried out within 20 working days from the end of the consultation period. The Licensing Act subcommittee will consider the application before them and the representations and evidence it hears. The subcommittee can decide to grant the licence as applied for, modify the conditions, exclude a licensable activity, refuse to specify a designated premises supervisor on the licence, or refuse the application. Tacit authorisation applies to premises licence applications where no objections are received. The licensing team will advise if objections are received. However, if you have not heard by the end of the next working day following the 28 days after your application was accepted, the 28 days terminate at midnight, please contact the licensing team to confirm there have been no objections before you assume your licence has been granted as applied for. If representations are received from responsible authorities or any other persons, then you must wait for the Council to determine the application before any licensable activities can take place. Please note that the licensing team will always contact you as soon as any objections are received within the consultation period. And the next slide, please. The annual fees. Once granted, the licence is subject to an annual fee. That's due, the first being due on the anniversary of the granting of the premises licence in each subsequent year. If the capacity applied for is 5,000 persons or over, an additional fee is payable, and that's dependent on the number of persons applied. So that again is in a tiered system based on the increments of persons attending. Failure to pay the annual fee will result in suspension of the licence. And the next slide. So there's various amendments that can be undertaken once the licence has been granted. This is by no means all of them, but the applicant on a variation application, a minor variation application to vary DPS would always need to be made by the premises license, the name of the premises licence holder. So the variation application, so if you were going to submit something and you wanted to increase your timings, for example, and licensable activities, and that will have an impact on the objectives, and you were going to increase, say, another one would be add in another bar area that's going to significantly increase your capacity, then we would expect to see a variation application. If it's a minor variation to the premises, a simple amendment to your plan, reduction in the licensing hours or activities, then it could be submitted to a minor variation. Benefit of that is there is no publication required of a press notice. You do require a notice, but not a press notice, and it's significantly, in most cases, cheaper. But it would be minus. An example of that would be, say, a supermarket is already has their layout, but they're making changes with fixed structures to the layout, and then we'd accept that as a minor variation. Application to vary DPS requires an application form. The proposed DPS is required to complete the consent to be the DPS. And the principles for responding to the questions on those are the same pretty much as submitting the grant application, which we've just gone over. And then if you are going to transfer a premises licence, that requires an application form which should be completed by the new intended premises licence holder, along with proof of right to, if it's applicable to them, the consent to transfer form, and that needs to be completed by the outgoing premises licence holder. Just code is worthwhile if you were thinking of obtaining a premises to obtain that consent to transfer, because sometimes that can delay where people can't get hold of people once they've vacated the premises. If the premises are leased, the freeholder has a right to inform the licensing authority of their interest in the premises and register to be notified of any applications and other matters that they may affect the licence. They pay a small fee, and then we have to, it's noted on the record, and if any, say if they're going to do a variation, then we would need to notify them. So that's an overview of applying for a premises licence. I hope you found it useful. If you pop any questions in the chat, we'll have a look at answering those, and I'll hand you over to Julie. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kath. Okay, yeah, my name's Julie Flower. So if I could have the next slide, please, Luke. So yes, I'm going to talk to you briefly now about temporary event notices, which are usually referred to as TENs. So a TEN is a light touch system for small scale events. It costs just £21 to submit a TEN. So the premises user simply gives notice to the licensing authority, the police and environmental health with details of the event and the proposed licensable activities taking place at that event. Although it's meant as a light touch system, there are several limitations and restrictions which are set out in the legislation. There has to be less than 500 people at the event, and that includes everyone, so not just the audience, it also includes staff, performers, and so on. So a TEN can be used to authorise licensable activities at an event where there is no existing premises licence, or it can be used to authorise an event outside the terms of an existing licence. So, for example, if a licensee wanted to extend their alcohol licensing hours for a specific occasion. So it's important to note that TENs do not authorise events themselves, but it authorises the licensable activities at those events. So the sale of alcohol or the entertainment. So there's two types of TENs, standard TEN and late TEN. It's the same form which you apply for online, and the TEN form is available on the council's website. Only individuals over 18 can submit TENs, and that individual should be the responsible person at the event. You have to give at least 10 clear working days notice for a standard TEN and at least 5 clear working days notice for a late TEN. And clear working days do not include the day the notice is given, nor the day of the event. So these are the absolute minimum timescales which are set out in legislation. So unfortunately, the licensing authority don't have any discretion around those. So we therefore recommend that TENs are submitted at least 3 months in advance. Also, I would point out if you are submitting a TEN for an event on land where there is no premises licence, we would also advise you complete the council's event notification form so that all the relevant services of the council can be made aware of your event and advise you if there are any other permissions required. So with regard to TENs, only the police and environmental health can object if they consider that the event would undermine any of the licensing objectives, which you've just heard are prevention of crime and disorder, prevention of public nuisance, public safety and protection of children from harm. Okay, next slide please, Luke. So as well as the strict timescales for submitting TENs, there's also quite a few restrictions and limitations. So as I've already stated, the maximum number of people can be 499. As it states there, each TEN can last no more than 168 hours. Each premises can have no more than 15 TENs per calendar year. And the maximum number of days each premises can operate under a TEN is 21 days in total. There has to be a minimum of 24 hours between each event. And there are also restrictions on the number of TENs which individuals can submit. So personal licence holders can submit 50 standard TENs plus 10 late TENs each calendar year, and non-personal licence holders can submit 5 5 standard TENs plus 2 late TENs each calendar year. So again, all of these restrictions and limitations are in the legislation, so again, we don't have any discretion around those. If a TEN is received which doesn't meet the timescales or the limits, it is automatically rejected, and we would advise you to apply for a premises licence instead. But if the TEN does meet the criteria, the licensable activities can go ahead unless an objection is received. So the licensing authority always send an acknowledgement. We don't actually issue a license as such. You're just giving notice. So the 10 itself is your authorization. So a copy should be kept by the notice giver at the premises. So as I stated, only the police and environmental health can object to a 10, and they have to do so within 3 working days after they receive a copy of the 10. So obviously, if we do receive an objection, you will be notified straight away. If the objection is for a standard 10, there may be a Licensing Act subcommittee hearing to determine whether to allow the activities to take place or whether to issue a counter notice, which would prevent the activities. In some cases, following objection or concern being raised by the police or environmental health, an agreement can be reached without the need for a hearing. But if there is a hearing, you are, of course, invited to attend. If there's an objection to a late 10, because of very short timescales, there's no provision for a hearing and a counter notice is automatically issued, so the event cannot go ahead. Or should I say the licensable activities at the event cannot go ahead. So that's another reason why we suggest that 10s are submitted well in advance, because if there's any problems, it's good to be able to have enough time to get any problems resolved. Just also wanted to point out that 10s are published on the council's website now, so you can see the premises, the dates, the times and the licensable activities for upcoming 10s. Okay, next slide please, Luke. Okay, moving on to pavement licensing now. So I'm just going to give you an overview regarding pavement licensing. So back in 2020, during the pandemic, temporary legislation came in under the Business and Planning Act, which made some temporary changes to licensing, which included simplifying the way that pavement licenses are dealt with. Pandemic, it was known as a tables and chairs license, and these were dealt with by highways, where permission was needed from highways and planning, and it was quite a lengthy process. So the temporary simplified system was extended several times to support businesses recovering from the pandemic and to promote economic recovery. But the pavement licensing, I'm pleased to say, was finally made permanent in March 2024 under the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act. So the Act allows businesses such as cafes, restaurants and bars to place tables and chairs and other removable furniture outside their premises on the highway for the consumption of food or drink. And next slide, please. So who can apply for a pavement licence? So any premises selling food or drink for consumption on or off the premises. So pubs, cafes, bars, restaurants, snack bars, coffee shops, ice cream parlours, and so on. So those businesses can apply to place removable furniture on the highway for people to consume food or drink in connection with the use of the premises. So furniture includes tables, chairs, benches, counters, stools, umbrellas, barriers, heaters, and other articles used in connection with the outdoor consumption of food or drink. The furniture must be removable. It cannot be a permanent fixed structure. It must be able to be moved easily and stored away at night. So if the furniture is not removable, so if it's bolted to the ground or cannot reasonably be removed, application needs to be made to highways for permission, as non-removable street furniture does not fall within the new simplified pavement licensing system. Also, furniture does not include advertising boards, so A-frames require separate permission from highways. So pavement licence can only be applied for on areas of the public highway, such as pavements or footpaths, which are restricted to pedestrians, or roads where there is no vehicle access or vehicle access is restricted. And the area of highway must be adjacent or very near to the business premises. Also, obviously, the street furniture must not cause an obstruction. The needs of disabled people must be taken into account, particularly mobility impaired or visually impaired people, and there must be a minimum of 1.5 metres width, preferably 2 metres in fact, to allow wheelchair users to pass. Okay, next slide please, Luke. So the licensing process for pavement licensing. So the application is via email using a form on the council's website. The application also requires plans to be provided showing the premises and the area of highway to be used. We also need a description and photos of the furniture and plans showing the layout and position of the furniture. you would need to state the purpose of the furniture, whether it's for the consumption of food, consumption of drinks, or both, and whether alcohol is included. And obviously the days and times of operation would be needed. Public liability insurance is required if a license before a license can be issued, and there is an application fee depending on whether you apply for a 1-year or 2-year license. So once an application is submitted, the applicant also needs to display a site notice at the premises for 14 days, and there's a template for this on the council's website. So once an application is received and accepted, there is a 14-day consultation period, and details of the applications are published on the council's website, and we also consult with highways, the relevant town or parish council, police, fire and other relevant services within the council, such as licensing compliance, environmental health, health and safety, waste and community safety. So consultees or members of the public can submit their comments during the 14-day consultation period, and at the end of the 14 days the council then have another 14 days to determine the application, taking into account obviously any comments that have been received, and also having regard to the Equality Act in relation to the wheelchair users access, which I just mentioned. We also take into account the government guidance and mandatory and local conditions. So I've mentioned the no obstruction mandatory condition, but there's also another mandatory condition relating to smoke-free seating. So this means that those businesses who allow smokers outside must also make reasonable provision for non-smokers, such as a 2-metre distance between the smoking area and the non-smoking area. So pavement licenses can be granted wholly or in part, with or without additional conditions, and they can be issued for up to 2 years. So as well as the no obstruction and smoke-free mandatory conditions, there are also local conditions, including the use must not cause a nuisance with antisocial behaviour, noise or litter. So if there's no problems, the licenses remain in place for up to 2 years and can then be easily renewed. Okay, the next slide, please. So we've talked mainly today about alcohol, entertainment and pavement licensing, but there are many other licenses which the licensing team deal with here, and some of these are listed on the top of the slide, and also listed at the bottom of the slide some other activities which require permission, which are dealt with other services other than licensing. So there is a link on the council's website which will assist you in finding out which activities require a license and who to contact for each of those. Okay, so the next slide, please. And that brings me on to our licensing direct services. This is where officers can support businesses by advising what licenses are needed, and then help you successfully complete and submit your licensing applications so they are right first time. So the aim is to save you time by avoiding unnecessary delays, and also save you money by only applying for what you need. So our licensing direct services are chargeable, but are competitively priced and are likely to be much cheaper than using a solicitor or licensing consultant. Next slide, please, Luke. So these are the services that we offer under our License Direct system. There's pre-application advice, application assistance, check and send, telephone amendment, and also mediation. Also our colleagues in environmental health, they have a range of noise advice and assistance services, because obviously they are the responsible authority for the prevention of public nuisance licence objectives. And the next slide, please. So these are the main benefits of using our licensing direct system, which I've already touched upon. The saving money is quite significant. It's if you submit a premises license and go ahead and pay for your press notice, and then there's a problem with your application and the date has to be restarted, you may have to pay for another press notice, obviously as the dates in the press notice have to be exactly correct. So that does sometimes happen. So that's one of the benefits of using licensing direct. And finally, the next slide. This is I just wanted to share some feedback we received just a couple of weeks ago from a business who used our licensing direct service. I believe that there's plenty of other testimonials on the Business and Regulatory Support website relating to our services, but this is just one that we received a couple of weeks ago, so I thought I'd share that one with you. Thank you.
So if we jump into some questions then, so we've got one from Tina, and Tina asks, hello Tina, what is an incidental film, please? And I'm guessing this is something like if you walk into a pub and there's a film playing in the background and it's not sort of the main reason for the event. Is it something like that?
That's exactly right, Luke. Yeah, there's incidental music exemption, but there's also incidental film exemption. So if it's incidental to an event and the film's not the main event, so the film's not being advertised, people aren't going to an event just to watch a film. It's incidental to another activity. That's basically what that is.
It'd be another example there, but if you went in a museum and there's a film or an art gallery and a film's on show there, then people aren't specifically going to watch that film. It's just something that's happening in the background.
So moving on, Stuart, how do you determine what sort of event needs a license of any kind, and how big does it need to be to become an event? And I think we touched on this throughout the presentation a bit, didn't we?
It may have answered because of the temporary event notices. I mean, the temporary event notices are for events with under 500 people. Anything more than that would need a premises license. But it's not really about the event. It's about licensable activities. At the event is whether you would need authorization, and it's either a temporary event notice or a premises license, depending on the size.
Great. I hope that helps, Stuart. And so Nuki BID, hello. So to clarify, playing recorded music in a business throughout the day does not require a license. This is a two-part question. So is that a license for PRS, not through us if it's inside the business?
So the exemptions that were stated there are related where that information was regarding the premises license, and there are further details around the exemptions of them, but you wouldn't need anything from us as those exemptions were stated there, but it doesn't mean to say there might not be other requirements. So I've put the link in there, .gov, you do need the PPL PRS, highly likely that they require a license for playing the music, and they distribute that through the music makers and recorders to keep the music industry going, obviously to pay them for what they're doing. But I think they're quite small fees, and all the details are in the link there, and we can send those out where you find that information.
So moving on then, Wayne asks, when doing a DPS variation, how long does it take to get the new license back?
When the applicant submits the application, there is a box on there that says with immediate effect. So if you tick that, make sure you tick that box, and then the consultation period on that one is 10 working days. So with the weekends, it's usually sort of falls into 14 days. But with immediate effect, the person becomes the DPS from that date stated, unless there's any issues raised, and then the officer will send out the new license. Following, usually they would turn that around in a couple of weeks. If there's a problem, they just send an email to licensing@cornwall.gov.uk, and then someone will look into that. If it's not being sent out in that time frame, might be the officer was absent or something like that on holiday.
Right. And another question from Tina. What are the rules around running small-scale events, less than 500 people, live music or plays, and operating a bring your own booze policy?
Yes, so you would need a under 500 people. You could apply for a temporary event notice because that would cover the licensable activities for music and plays. So if people are bringing their own alcohol, obviously you wouldn't need to apply for that. You would just apply for the entertainment, and people could bring their own alcohol, and that's not a licensable activity. So as long as you're not sort of charging at all, there's no sort of hidden charges for alcohol. People can bring their own, without, and that's not a licensable activity. Only the sale by retailer of alcohol is licensable.
Great, and let us know about that event, Tina. It sounds good. So Stuart, would people attending an event blocking a pavement temporarily need a license?
Yeah, I mean, if you're blocking a pavement, I mean, you would need permission from highways. So not sure what sort of event Stuart's referring to, but I mean, you wouldn't be able to block a pavement temporarily without permission from highways. So I think we'd probably need some more information on that, but you would definitely need some sort of permission.
Okay, great. Well, Stuart, feel free to add any clarification there
Yeah.
if you like. So moving on, Tina asks, can you confirm the 10 rules of whether you have to display the 10 prior to the event, and if so, when and where?
Not prior to the event, but the 10 form that you complete is as I said in the presentation, you should keep a copy of that, because that 10 is your actual authorization. So that should be displayed at the event, or at the very least in the possession of the person that submitted the 10. But
We
it doesn't
would
need to be
expect them
displayed prior.
We'd expect them to take the acknowledge with them as well, wouldn't we? So if there was an enforcement, that they would have the acknowledgement that we sent them.
Yeah, acknowledgement, yeah, and the 10 available at the event.
So, and the second part to Tina's question there, if you're a seasonal business, is there a pro rata rate for a license?
No, they're government statutory fees for a premises license. We don't have any control over them. They've not changed since 2003, since the Licensing Act was brought in, and those are the fees that are payable.
Moving on, Wayne asks, am I correct in saying would licensing direct help with DPS variations?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that's one of the things that we regularly do. We can help with that so that you get your application right first time. Hopefully save you some time.
Moving on to Shira Lee, you mentioned a premises can also be a vehicle. So would a mobile coffee van require a license for general day-to-day trading on private land, e.g. visiting private business premises?
So that could come under street trading. If it's a coffee, did you say coffee van? Yeah, mobile
Yeah, a
coffee
mobile
van.
coffee
So yeah,
van.
coffee. So
Yeah.
we're not talking about alcohol. So coffee, yeah. If you're selling coffee from a mobile van, could be street trading. I mean, there's quite a few exemptions for street trading as well. I mean, private land, it depends if that private land is close to the public highway. Because if it's close to the public highway, you still need street trading consent, even though it's on private land. But we can send you some more information regarding street trading, because that's another subject altogether.
And with that, I think we'll probably wrap it up. So Julie and Kath, if you're happy, we'll call it there.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Bye.
Yeah, thank you so much everyone for attending. Hopefully I'll see you at another webinar. Goodbye, have a good weekend.